Well, as I said when I began the reading just now, I've chosen a different passage to speak upon, and that is Galatians chapter 2 and verses 15 and 16. Galatians chapter 2 and verses 15 and 16. And I'll just say how and why I've moved to this passage from Philippians chapter 3. As I explained, I was going to speak upon Philippians 3. I think it did follow on from the man who got it wrong to the man who, though he started getting it wrong, he got it right. But I've come to this, and I'll explain why. I think it's important. It is possible to preach the Word of God simply by saying, well, here's the text, and it's the next text on the passage, and we'll just take this and treat it as a kind of object to speak on. I don't know what kind of words I'm looking for. But that's not what I'm doing here. I've chosen this because I think I can't think of a better passage to suit the present circumstances here. I'm being honest with you. One of my quarrels about modern medicine is that doctors often seem to treat me as sort of a patient number on the list. And they've almost got the prescription ready before I go in. Whereas I remember a doctor I had about 25 years ago, I knew him for some time, and I would say about that doctor that he knew me. And when he looked at me, he didn't just see patient number 3,448, whatever it is, and then just treat it like that. He saw me, and he knew what I was like. And he let me know at times, too, that he knew what I was like. But I think that was real medicine. I think he was acting as a doctor should act. I don't blame the doctors altogether. I mean, I'm not going to get into that. But, I mean, they probably got too much pressure. But the fact is, I've got to the place now where I don't actually choose a doctor by name because I don't think they know me any more than I know them. Whereas I think before, I would go to the same doctor every time, and he knew me, my wife, my children, or whatever it is. And he knew about me. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is I've chosen this passage because I think it fits here. I'm not trying to be patronizing, but I'm trying to do some good. I'm not just preaching a passage. I'm not saying I'm not interested in the text. Of course I'm interested in the text. I spend a lot of time arguing about texts. But the text is not, now let's get it straight, the text is not the all-important thing. You are. This is meant to do good for you and for me too. Perhaps I can illustrate it again. I don't know whether this makes any sense to you. But I remember, it was a Sunday afternoon actually, and my wife had just had a major brain operation. This is in 1988, back a long time ago, and she was in Adam Brooks intensive care. And she was wired up with all sorts of tubes and wires and stuff, and dials and meters flashing everywhere. And I was in the room with this sister, I suppose she was, and the one dial was going all over the place. And I must have been worried, and I said to the sister, this dial, this meter, whatever it was doing, I don't know what it was doing now. And she was very calm about it, and she just said to me, well, I had this, she said, with a young nurse many years ago. And this is what I said to her, and I'm saying it to you. Don't look at the dial, look at the patient. Look at the patient. Now, I'm not saying she shouldn't look at the dial, but look at the patient. The patient's all right. I know there's a risk in saying that, but I think that sister was spot on. The patient was more important to her than the dials. I think we live in a generation now when ticking the box is more important than the people. I think in education, I should hate it if I was back in there again, I'm sure. I think there's more red tape in ticking the box and getting this and that right. What about the children? What do they know? Are they interested? I wonder how many inspectors go around and ask to see the plans of this and the schemes of that. Do they ever look at the children? See what's happening to them. What I'm trying to say to you is I want this passage to do you good. I'm being blunt with you. And I think this passage is spot on. I think some of you here, I hope, you'll find a benefit out of this. Right, let's come to it. You remember the passage, what the context we're dealing with. Here is a man who got it wrong about being right with God. No more important question. How can I be right with God? And that Pharisee got it completely wrong. Paul was like that, but he got it right. Philippians 3. Okay. Now, he's telling the Galatians, or he's telling Peter, and we're not sure, I can't be sure here, who he's addressing in verse 15 of chapter 2. He's just had a run-in with Peter. He's just had a disagreement with Peter. Paul has done something very brave in this chapter. He has stood up to Peter because he said Peter was getting it wrong, and Barnabas too, two very close friends, but they got it wrong. And how they got it wrong was this, very briefly. They were happily eating with Gentiles. Now, that is vital because these were Jews, and you remember in Acts chapter 10, Peter had said, we're not possible for Jews to eat with Gentiles, but God has shown me that I shouldn't call any man unclean. And so the gospel has broken down that which was in the old covenant. The old covenant, the Jews were absolutely separate from the Gentiles, and they had not to mix at all. But in the gospel, this is one of the changes in the covenants, in the gospel, the barriers are broken down. And Peter was eating, and Barnabas, they were eating with these Gentile believers. They were all happy together. And then some law teachers came from Jerusalem, and they started teaching the people about the law and must come back under Moses. And Peter and Barnabas were swept away with it. They believed it. It's amazing. After Acts chapter 10, you can hardly credit it. But Peter yielded to it. Now, Paul could see that this was terrible. This was utterly dangerous. If they carry on like this, the gospel will be lost. He saw the real importance of this, and publicly he rebuked Peter to his face. I think we should be deeply thankful that this man had such courage. I haven't got his courage. I pull my punches. But this man had the courage to stand up to Peter and say in front of them all, you are wrong. And I believed myself with all my heart that he was actually contending for the gospel there. And if he'd lost it, I think we'd be in a terrible state today. I think under God, we owe so much to that man in this episode. Now, whether he's still reproving Peter here is quite possible, or whether he's moved on to talk to the Gentiles. That really doesn't matter. But this is what he says in verse 15. We are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles. Now, that's just introducing what I want to say. I'm a Jew, all right? I'm a Jew. I'm writing as a Jew. So if anybody, go back to Philippians 3. If anybody knows the law, if anybody understands the importance of the law or whatever it is, the background, it's me, okay? I'm not just a trumped up somebody from the street. I really know what I'm talking about. I've been through the law. I am a lawman. I was a Pharisee. But now verse 16. It's very simple this morning. It'll be brief, but very simple. But I hope it's very telling. I hope there's some power in it. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law. That's what he says. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law. Now, what does he mean by this? Well, he says, it's Philippians 3 again. I've come to see, come to know. Now, he uses a word there which means I've come to understand. I've come to get it. I didn't used to think like this, he said. I thought it was all law stuff. But I've come to see, knowing that a man or woman is not justified, not right with God, not accounted right with God, not righteous, not justified. I've come to see that it's not by the law, by the works of the law. I've come to see that. Now, this is a staggering statement he's making here as a Jew. Of course, he's making it in Philippians 3, which I've read to you. He's gone into more detail there. But he's saying the same thing here. I used to think it was law. I was the Pharisee of Luke 18. I was the man who thought that I was right with God by what I did, by keeping the feast, by going to the temple, by doing this and that and the other. No, he said, I've come to see that it's not like that. I know that. I've come to understand that. Now, he's not telling us how he came to understand that, but I can fill it in for you if you need to. You'll need to read Acts chapter 9, and you'll soon see how he came to find it. He was going to Damascus. He was absolutely determined to put down this Christ and all his people, and he was going to determine to stand for the law. But by the time he came to his sight again in Damascus, he completely changed his mind. His understanding had switched completely. It was Christ after all, and it was not the law at all. I came to understand that, he said. So what was it then, Paul? Well, I've just hinted at it. Verse 16 again. But knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. I came to see, he said, I've come to understand, although I thought it was by my works, I came to see, I came to understand, I'm fully persuaded about it, that it's not that way, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Now, I don't want to make things difficult for you, but you need to understand this. That word of makes for a difficulty here. It's what we call the genitive. I won't be too technical, but that of makes a difficulty. Let me try and illustrate it for you. When you use the word of, it can mean at least two things. The love of God, for example, it can be God's love for me. It's God's own love. The love of God is God's love. You know very well that God's love and love of God, the word of there does the, possession. It's the possessive thing. Who's doing the possessing here? It's God's love, the love of God. Mary's house, the house of Mary. Tom's car, the car of Tom. But you can use the word of to mean love of God, love for God. My love for God. This is not just Greek, it's English. But you're in no trouble. You know it every time. When somebody uses the word of, you know whether they're talking about which way round they're meaning it. That's trying to make it as simple as I can. You know where the possession is. Because when you're reading it here, you have to ask yourself, does he mean knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but we know that a man is justified by the faith of Christ. Does it mean Christ's own faith? Is it because Jesus believed, trusted his Father, that that's the way I am justified? Does it mean that because Christ was a believer, he trusted in God? All right, that kind of talk. He did trust in God. Is that what Paul is saying? I do not think so for a moment. I don't deny the truth of that, but I don't think that's what he's saying at all. I think the possession here, the of here, means I have come to see it's not Christ's faith, it's my faith in him. There's a world of difference there. I have come to understand that it's not by my works that I'm justified. The only way I'm going to get justification is by faith in Christ. There is another possibility, and I'll just explain it to you. When you read in the Bible the faith of Jesus Christ, sometimes, and it does mean it in Galatians chapter 3 actually, sometimes it means the gospel, before the faith came, before the gospel came. So perhaps he does mean here, I know we're not justified by the law, but by the gospel. Well, there's truth in that, but I still don't think that's what he's saying here. I am convinced from other places, and indeed this text itself, that what he is saying is what I've said to you. I used to think that it was what I did, but I've come to see that it's what Christ did. That's what I've come to see, knowing that. I've come to see it, understand it. I get it. I was talking to my daughter on the phone yesterday, and she was taking me back to the days when she was a girl at school. And I'd forgotten this episode. And she said, you remember you were taking me so-and-so and you were driving the car? And it came out in the conversation that I didn't understand my maths at school. She explained that at one stage she had a teacher who was teaching her, and Rachel, the teacher would say, do this exercise. And Rachel would look at this question, and my daughter, and she said, I don't understand it. So she tell this teacher, I don't understand it. And so the teacher said, well, read it again. So Rachel read it again, she said, and so I still don't understand it. But the teacher kept telling her, just keep reading it, see? Well, actually, the teacher didn't understand how to do it either. That's what it was. But we were traveling somewhere, and apparently, and I remembered it when she told me, it came out, and she said she didn't understand. So I said to her, why ever didn't you tell me you didn't understand? Anyway, within a few minutes, I was able to explain it to her. And she got it. That's the point. She got it. Paul got it. I see now the pen is dropped. No, he didn't use that phrase, but that's what he means. I've come to see. I've come to understand. It's not by my works on the law, but faith, trust. That's what the word means. Trust. It doesn't mean believe in the head. If you like, that's the knowing bit. But I've come to see that it's trust. I've come to see it's not just knowing, but it's trusting. See, he's gone further than just knowing. The first step was knowing. Yeah, I see it now. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. But that's not enough. Trusting. And then comes the punchline. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, there's the fact, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Now here's the punchline. Even we, have believed in Jesus Christ. That's why I said to you the text, I think, confirms what I was saying to you just now. Now, this is the point I want to bring to you today. All right? This is the point I want you to get. I really do want you to get it. I want to get it. I want to experience it. What is the point here? This man knows what it's not. People don't like negatives today, do they? They don't like negatives. Be positive. No, my friend. Negatives are very important. It's getting quite medical this morning, but my wife used to suffer from chilblains. Now, I don't know if some of you do suffer with chilblains, but it's like arthritis. There's any amount of nostrums, any amount of advice about what you can do to cure yourself of chilblains, stop chilblains. One of the things, and she actually did this, was to do with onions, rubbing onions in your feet. Put onions in your socks and wear them in bed. Now, she actually went to the GP in the end and he did something else. He gave her some vitamin A, but that's a different matter. But the point is, the first thing the doctor would surely say is, you can stop doing that. Negative first. I heard of a lady, two ladies actually were driving down in the southwest, in Bristol area, and they were stuck in a service station and the car had broken down. And the AA man was called out and he said, well, have you checked the water? Have you checked this? Oh yeah, we always check the water and the petrol. And we filled up, you see, with the water and whatever it was in those days, and the petrol and so on. Well, he asked her, what were you doing? Well, she said, well, it all goes in the same place, doesn't it? So she put the water and the petrol in the filler tank. What do you think the AA man said? Don't do that, ma'am. Stop that. Water in there, or whatever it is, petrol in there. Negatives are important. Paul says we've come to see that. But it's more than seeing it. And we've come to see the positive. Yeah, well, it's nice to know the right way, isn't it? Good. We know the right way now. But my friend, what he's saying is, I only know the right way, I've taken it. Here's another medical illustration. It's very well having the right medication, my friend, on your shelf. And that's an absolute cure, whatever it might be. I don't know what it might be. But if you don't actually take the medication, it won't do any good in the packet. Even I've taken the step. I saw what I had to do. I understood, I came to realize that it was not by trusting the law and my works in the law, but by trusting Christ. Even so, he said, I have believed. This is the fact. I've done it myself. I've trusted Christ. I've actually got there and done it. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ. Now, let me just finish the verse. Before I do, let me tell you another illustration. I've used it here before, I'm sure, but I remember many, many years ago, a lady saw my wife in the town and she wanted to criticize me. And she said to my wife, she said, your husband repeats himself when he's preaching. And Jean said straight away, yeah, but he was a schoolmaster. I learned by school teaching that if you don't tell him, you don't just tell him once, you tell him and you tell him and you tell him. Lloyd Jones, when he was a very young preacher, was preaching one afternoon, big chapel meeting in South Wales, And he was sitting next to an older minister who was preaching in the evening. And Lloyd Jones preached in the afternoon and came down and sat next to the older minister. And the older minister said, that was very good this afternoon, he said, but it was too much. And he said, you know, you had too much there or something. No, he said, you watch me tonight. You watch me, he said. He said, I'm going to tell him the same thing 3 times. I'm going to tell him one thing 3 times. Different ways, but I'm going to tell him one thing 3 times. Well, I can talk about being a schoolmaster, I can talk about Lloyd Jones and all that kind of thing, but let me tell you about Paul. Do you want to hear a man, a preacher, repeating himself? Good preachers repeat themselves. Listen to this man. I'll read verse 16 to you for you. Get the repetition. You can't miss it. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. And in case you haven't got it, for by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. 3 times in one verse, I tell you. No justification by the works of the law. It's not by knowledge. It's not by knowing the facts. It's not by understanding the facts. It's not being able to preach the facts. I'm talking to myself. It's not being able to write it out and to explain it. You've actually got to trust. Well, that's 2,000 years ago, isn't it? It's bang up to date, my friend. I think we're living in a time when it won't be works of the law, but it'll be something like this. I think there's a growing number of people, and I think it will grow exponentially, if you understand that mean. It'll grow very quickly. This number of people who think that by going to, inverted commas, a place of worship, attending chapel, I go to church. And I think there'll be many people who think because they go to church, that makes them right with God. Some of you don't believe that, but that's my conviction. The evangelical world is preaching this over and over again. Come to chapel, come to church, attend the services, keep coming, keep going. And I think people to get the message. If you attend, you're right. My friend, you can attend chapel every day of the week. And that won't do a scrap to saving you. But it's knowing things. I think this is one of the dangers of the catechism system. We catechized our children, as a matter of fact, but even so, I think there's a big danger in it. People can think because they know the facts and they can answer the questions, that makes them right with God. Take Lloyd Jones again. He tells you, he said, this is what happened to me. I was in my teens, I think he was 14 or something like that, and the minister said to him, it's about time you join the church. Oh, yeah, all right. And to join the church, what the minister did was interview him and ask him a question. And the question that Lloyd Jones was asked by this minister was, can you tell me the name of the brook that Jesus crossed after the Last Supper? You know, it's the brook Kidron. Can you tell me the name of that brook? And Lloyd Jones looked at him blank and said, no, I can't. But it didn't make any difference. He was still made a member. Can you see the difficulty? Because he could answer the name of a brook, this minister was really saying to him, you're right with God. Actually, it didn't matter if he didn't know the name of the brook. My friend, you can know the catechism, you can know the Westminster Confession, you can know the 1689, you name whatever you want, the 39 articles, name it. You can name it back to front. You can know Calvin's Institutes, you can know Spurgeon's sermons, you can know the works of John Bunyan, and still not be saved. In fact, going back to Philippians 3, you could argue that if you got too much knowledge of all these things, that could be a loss to you in the sense of keeping you back from Christ. There's only one thing that gets you right with God, and that's actually trusting Jesus. I'm not saying a word against knowing doctrine or whatever it is I mentioned. That's not my point. But I am saying a big word for this. Even we have believed. That was the point I wanted to make to you this morning. I know that for some of you here, well, I can't really know, but I am convinced that you know the way of salvation. I've preached it. I dare say Mr. Finch has had a go at it. I dare say Gabriel's had a go at it. And I don't know how many other preachers have been here. I've been here over 20 years or more. Yes, you know the way of salvation. You know justification is by faith and trust in Christ. You know that. The blood of Jesus, the righteousness of Christ. You know that it's Christ and Christ only. You know. But the question is, have you actually trusted Jesus? Lord, save me. Me. Well, it might well be that you have, but of course I don't know unless you tell us. And you know the way to tell us. I'm not making it up. Jesus said, believe and be baptized. I remember preaching on it last year. Dipping, remember? Well, that's all I wanted to say. That's what I thought was the most appropriate text. It's not by the works of the law. It's not by my knowledge, by my attendance. What else can you think of? Put it there. I knew of a lady. Her practice was, I understand, and I don't know by experience, but this is how I understood from her sister, that she would go to bed every night and she put her head on the pillow and she would say, Our Father which art in heaven, and that would get her right with God. Do you believe that? Remember in Bleak House, when Esther Summerson is talking to the crossing sweeper, he's dying, the little boy, the urchin, and she said, Do you know a prayer? No? Our Father, which art. Do you think saying the Lord's Prayer, if that's what you call it, is going to save you? When the Titanic was going down, they were in the boats. And what were they saying? Our Father. Millions think because a priest or a minister or whatever you call it sprinkled in with water, they're right with God. They really believe that. Can you credit it? Even we have been sprinkled because even we have trusted Christ. The thief on the cross, he couldn't be sprinkled. I know Augustine said he was sprinkled with the blood of Christ by spray, rubbish. He trusted. Look unto me. That means trust and be saved. I'm not saying a word against knowledge. We have to know the gospel, I'm sure of it. We have to know we're sinners, I'm sure of it. Yeah. That's not my problem here. The problem is that crunch step. Have you actually believed? Oh, I can plead with you, I can urge you, I can beg you, I can invite you, I can command you, and I do. Nothing would please me, or I'm sure the friends here, to hear you say, I have trusted Christ. There's no presumption in that. This is what Paul said. This is what we've all said. I have no other argument. I have no other plea. But what? It is enough that Jesus died and that he died for me. I know people have told you that's presumptuous. Rubbish. It's not. It's faith. And God says, whosoever believeth shall be saved. Trusts. Not just accepts, but really trusts. Well, I'm not going to keep on rattling on, but let me just remind you of the hymn we're going to sing. And here's a man who will tell us. He says, now I have found the ground wherein my anchor hope shall firm remain. I found it. Yeah. Okay. Jesus, I know, has died for me. Yes. Yeah. But this is what he says. I know all these facts. And then he says this, I look into my Savior's breast. I know it. I'm persuaded he'd done it. He did it for my dad. He did it for my mum. He did it for my, whatever it was. Yeah. But he's done it for me. For me.